Hello everyone, welcome to Run My Arts watercolor series. So recently I shared a tutorial on how to paint colorful glass bottles using watercolor, and this week I am going to show you how to paint a glass vase with more details, since this is a solo subject matter of painting. You can download the basic sketch of this vase as well as a template of the actual measurement of this entire drawing on an A5 size watercolor paper. So I've left the link in the description. You can use any watercolor paper as long as it's of 300 grams per square meter thickness at least. And as usual, I am using Canson cold press. And the main color for this vase is going to be a cool gray. So you can see me mixing some burnt sienna with a deep blue tone, which is sapphire blue. You can use ultramarine. So mix these two colors until you arrive at a cool gray shade. So I'm going to paint the first layer using the wet on wet technique. So you can see me pre-wetting the sketch, the base sketch, with some clean water. Following that, I am going to paint the cool gray mix that I made earlier onto this pre-wet surface. You can paint this using the wet on dry as well. There's no problem with that. However, since this is supposed to portray this is an impression of a glass vase, I want it to look even more smoother and light in color, which is why I chose to paint the first layer using the wet on wet technique. As I paint, you can see it is quite obvious or evident that the smooth washes on this pre-wet surface maintains a very soft look of this entire painting. And as I paint, you can also notice that I'm leaving some white areas or unpainted areas. These are the areas of light or shimmer on the glass vase, assuming that the light source is coming from the right hand side. I noticed that there are some hard lines, so I'm going to soften all those hard lines or hard edges with a clean damp brush. So before I drop in the second color, I am just gently pre-wetting the bottom part of the vase, because my painting has dried. So if your painting is still wet, you can skip this. You don't need to pre-wet your painting. So the second color is a mixture of the same burnt sienna with a hint of yellow ochre, just to tone down a little bit of that dark brown shade. And I'm just quickly dropping in that color onto the pre-wet surface. So basically I chose this brown shade simply because this vase is actually placed on a brown color table or desk. So definitely a little bit of that brown shade would be reflected or seen through this translucent glass vase. So next I am going to proceed to paint the table that I mentioned earlier with the same brown shade, and before doing so I am just pre-wetting the area of the table. Now I am applying the brown mix, and brush strokes are pretty simple since this is already a pre-wet surface. Just paint like how we painted the vase. After painting the table surface, I am going to lift out some pigment using a smaller size brush which has a narrow tip. So as you can see here, I'm lifting out some pigment to reveal a lighter side of the table, which is supposed to indicate the reflection of the glass vase lightly. Well, it might not make much difference at this point of time, but it surely will be helpful as we make more adjustments at a later stage, especially when it comes to painting the shadows. So now that the painting has dried, I am going to make some fine-tuned details, which is to paint some designs. in the form of carvings, vertical line carvings on a glass vase. I'm sure you would have seen such a glass vase with such patterns. So in order to do so, I'm using the same grey, cool grey mix. It's just that the difference is I am painting it on a dry surface. So basically this is a wet paint on a dry surface. And in order to paint these fine lines or details, I would suggest you to use a script brush or a rigger brush similar to what I'm using over here. And as I make these details or paint the details, I am also mindful with my brush strokes. As I paint, I need to ensure the dark and light areas of the glass vase, which means I am more focused on the tonal values of the entire painting. As I mentioned earlier in this tutorial, the light source assumed in this painting is coming from the right hand side of the vase. So definitely the left hand side of the glass vase would look much darker. So bearing this in mind, I am painting all those stripes or the carvings on the vase, and not forgetting leaving all those light areas without much marks or details. As usual, I need to soften all those hard lines, and in order to soften all those corners, all the hard lines on the corners, I am just using a smaller size damp brush with a narrow tip and just softening those edges. And in order to soften a larger area of painting area, as in the middle part of this vase, I am going to use a damp paper towel. So just wet the paper towel with some clean water and squeeze the excess water, and eventually it should only be a damp paper towel, not with too much or excessive water like how I'm showing over here. And use this damp paper towel to lightly rub onto your painting, and this method will give it a washout effect, whereby the stripes that I painted earlier will appear to be less sharper, where some part of the lines would have a washout effect. So basically this effect would create an impression of the light areas on the glass vase as a result of natural light shining onto the vase, and this gives a much more realistic look of the entire glass vase painting. You can also use a sponge as an alternative. Just make sure that you don't rub it too harsh onto the paper, otherwise there could be some abrasion on the watercolor paper. Next, I am going to paint some shadow, especially onto the left hand corner of the painting. And before I do so, I am just lightly pre-wetting the area that I'm going to paint the shadow. So just lightly pre-wet the area with clean water. And once again, I am painting the shadow using the same cool grey mix that I used to paint the glass vase. And the reason I'm painting this using the wet on wet technique is because of the nature of the glass vase, which is translucent. So the shadow casted would definitely look much more softer compared to an opaque or solid object. And remember earlier the areas where I have lifted the pigment when I painted the table shade. So over here I am just trying to paint those casted shadow of the carvings or pattern of the glass vase onto the light areas. So basically the lifted pigment acts as the shimmer or shine from the glass element itself onto the table surface. So if I would have left the table with a darker shade of the brown, maybe a bit difficult to show that effect on the painting. So after painting those shadows, I am once again softening all those hard lines using a clean damp brush to soften it further. So more shadow was needed, so I am just using the same method to paint a light shadow above the main shadow. So just pre-wetting that area, and I'm just going to paint the same gray mix to create the shadow effect. So since the empty vase is quite boring, I'm going to fill it up with a painting of a eucalyptus plant cuttings. So I'm going to kickstart by painting the stem using the rigger brush, and I'm using a mix of permanent green with a hint of sapphire. And this is how a eucalyptus plant looks like. I'm sure a lot of you are quite familiar. So I'm just mixing the permanent green once again, and I'm using a mop style round brush, just painting those leaves in a form of disc or oval. So it would be best to paint these leaf shapes using a round brush, especially if you have a narrow tip, it will be better still. You can also add some other variations of green shades just to add some extra character, since they are not all uniform in color. So do experiment with other green shades from light to dark. I am using a slightly darker shade of green mix for this particular stem, simply because it is facing the left hand side of the painting, which means it's a bit further from the light source, so I assume it needs to appear slightly darker than the rest. Alright, time to paint the stem inside the vase, which is an interesting part of the painting. So since the stems of the eucalyptus plant is inside a medium, which is the glass vase, so definitely it wouldn't be in a form of straight or its natural form. So therefore I am making some zigzag or uneven shapes as I paint the stem. Just extending that dark green mix I used to paint the stem towards other parts of the eucalyptus tree, just to create some contrast. And once again I am back with the damp paper towel to soften the look of the stem, which is inside the glass vase. As I said, it's inside a medium. You're supposed to have a washout effect, as well as to create the shine effect or shimmer due to the light reflected on the glass vase. So just rub gently onto the stem painting and you will achieve that washout effect, just like what I did earlier in the vase painting. And here's a comparison of the image before and after the washout effect. Next, I am going to fine tune the details of the glass vase, and I'm using a script brush to paint all those fine lines and paint mix is still the same grey mix with a hint of indigo. You can just stick to the same grey mix. So as for fine details, obviously you're supposed to paint them without any washout effect. So please make sure your painting is completely dry before you proceed to this step. And as I paint these fine lines, I am still mindful of the light and bright areas of the glass vase. So do keep that in mind. Painting some of the glass design or carvings overlapping the stem painting, and this automatically creates an impression of the stem being inside the medium, which is the glass vase. Now it can be pretty challenging trying to paint all these fine lines, especially in a very vertical or horizontal manner, but patience, painting it very calmly and patiently will definitely help you to achieve the results. It may look easy or flawless over here, but this is a speed up video, so obviously it looks as if I'm painting very flawlessly. So do not worry about being perfect with your brush strokes. A calm movement and a painting process would help you enjoy the process as well and achieve the result that you desire. So at this point of time, I am just trying to lift out more pigment from the shine area of the painting. And since this is a dry painting, I am just brushing those dry areas with the damp brush and lifting it out by pressing the dry paper towel onto those areas. Now to enhance the appearance of the shine or reflection, I am using a white gouache as usual to paint on those areas on the table as well as the entire glass vase. A bit of those highlight effect onto the eucalyptus plant as well. And the painting is complete. So did you like the outcome of this painting, given all those tips that I have shared? And if you really enjoyed this tutorial, then don't forget to hit the like and share button as well as subscribe to my channel. And for those who have, thank you so much for your support. I'll see you in another tutorial. Bye.